I discovered a town where no one is allowed to die. As a journalist, I get to travel the country a lot. A part of my job includes a column regarding small-town myths and legends. It's not the most factual part of my work, but I still enjoy it. At least I did until I found a town called Silverwoods. According to my anonymous source, it was a place that hadn't changed since the late 50s. A remnant of a bygone era, suffering from a horrible curse. As the myth would have it, nothing there was allowed to die. Mind you, this was before the time of Google Maps. I had to rely on my source's instruction when searching for the town. I fully expected it to be a prank, but my job was exactly that, to prove or disprove information. I set out on my journey. After a few hours of driving, I pulled onto a well-hidden, dirt road. It had been poorly maintained, and it would take me another 3 hours before I even found a hint of civilization, an old, wooden sign. Silverwoods. Turn around now, it read. In the distance, I saw what looked like an old farming community. Just a small town with a few buildings that had partially fallen apart, and trucks that had rusted beyond repair. At a first glance, it looked abandoned. I parked my car on the side of the road, ready to call the myth bullcrap. Then I heard someone call out, "Why did you come here?" A weak voice said. I turned towards the voice. It belonged to a frail old man, holding himself up with a cane. He was bald, and his teeth had all but fallen out. "Who are you?" he asked. Feeling mildly uncomfortable, I introduced myself. "Why are you here?" I explained that I had been given directions by an anonymous source, and that I was hunting down myths and legends. He sighed. "Ignorance is bliss, but since you're here, I will give you what you came for." Only then did I notice that his leg had broken. He dragged it along as he limped around. The weirdest part was that his skin was covered in scratches, all looking fresh. "Are you all right?" I asked nervously. He ignored the question, and simply gestured for me to follow. "Are you alone here?" "No, there are others." On the ground, I noticed what I assumed was a dead bird. Its torso had been ripped open, exposing the organs within. It looked like a cat attacked it. Yet, it tried to move around, alive despite its grave injuries. The bird, I tried to get out. The old man glanced over at it without batting an eye. "It's not allowed to die. Nothing here is allowed to die," he said. He led me inside an old house. No sooner had I taken a step through the front door, before my nose was assaulted by the stench of rotting flesh. There were a dozen people, littered around the room in various states of mutilation. Yet, they were all breathing, living with impossible injuries. The myth had been proven true, but I couldn't believe it. "We need to call for help," I said as I looked at a guy whose hands had no skin left on them. "It would only make things worse," the old man said. I already had my phone out, ready to dial 911. But, out in the middle of nowhere, I didn't have a single bar of signal to help me. "Sit down, let's talk." In shock at the sight, I couldn't find the words to argue. "You came here to learn the history of Silverwoods, and I'm going to tell you," he said. I sat down, and looked at all the suffering people around me. Most of them were too wounded to speak a single word, only letting out groans of agony where they sat. Every single injury looked fresh. It looked like not a single day had passed since acquiring them. Since our town was founded in 1911, we've been a regular farming community. A small town that hardly ever saw any visitors. Most of us were born and raised here, so on the rare occasion that someone passed through, it was a big deal. A cause for celebration. The man took a pause, and glanced at his broken leg. Then, in 1956, a man arrived in Silverwoods. With his fancy clothes and expensive car, he starkly contrasted our modest surroundings. He didn't visit for business, nor did he look to settle down in the region. All he wanted was to spend a year with us. At the end of his visit, he promised us a gift never to be forgotten. As he finished the sentence, I heard faint screams coming from outside. They sounded horribly hoarse, and emitted a clear message of agony. The man never said much. He just observed us as we went about our days, never shying away from lending a helping hand. He was polite, helpful, and within a month, we'd already accepted him as a part of the community. Still, he always wore that damn suit, and never seemed affected by anything around him. No matter the situation, he was calm, and looked in pristine shape. The screams got louder. Amid them, I could hear faint begs for mercy. Then, once his year in Silverwoods had ended, he asked us a simple question. What was it? I asked. Do you want to live forever? He paused, and sighed. The screams in the background felt ever more present, as if they knew I was there. At first, we laughed at the suggestion. Death wasn't an enemy, but we didn't hold it as a friend either. After a lengthy discussion, it all came down to a vote. I guess the outcome is clear. I stepped over to the window, and tried to figure out where the screaming was coming from. I wanted to run, but something deep inside me kept me from doing so. I pitied the people of Silverwoods, and I wanted to help them. So, you'll live forever? He nodded. He promised us that our bodies wouldn't age. Alas, without time affecting our bodies, we lost the ability to feel hunger, thirst and the need for sleep. Our bodies can't be killed by any injuries, disease, nor destruction. But, we can also never heal. Every injury we sustain, no matter how minor or severe it is, stays with us until the end of time. That is our curse. What about the people screaming? I asked. He sighed. It's coming from the barn. That's where we keep the people that want it out. Out? What do you mean? Some people got the idea that they could elude our curse, by destroying their own hearts. Others attempted to crush their heads. But, they were all wrong. They can't die, they're not allowed to. How can I help you? Is there any way to stop this? I asked. Then, he laughed. It wasn't a cheerful laugh, but one filled with malice. Stop it. We don't want it to stop. He said. 10 years ago, that same man returned to our town. He hadn't aged a day, and still smiled cheerfully as he greeted us. He offered us death, release from our horrific lives. Why didn't you accept it? He paused, his smile vanishing from his face. Because, he told us what happens to us after we die. And I can promise you, it's a far darker fate than the one we've been condemned to. We found a bunker hidden deep in the woods. It wasn't abandoned. My friends and I used to wander into the dark woods at night, wielding little more than our flashlights and overactive imaginations. It was the surge of adrenaline we needed, gained from harmless, non-existent horror. Lucky for us, there was a forest bordering our neighborhood. It was full of ancient trees that creaked in the wind. Our parents had often warned us about entering the woods, claiming the trees would fall due to the weakest gust of wind. Of course, their warnings fell on deaf ears. We were young, and felt invincible. Though we pretended to be brave, we usually didn't get far into the darkness of the woods, before cowering in fear. Each time, we'd mark how far we'd gotten before giving up. And, each time we set out on a new adventure, we promised each other to break the record. Our last journey occurred on the 29th of October, 2012. Liam and Frank were my best friends. Together, we ventured deeper into the woods than we ever had before. Liam, being a year older, always pretended to have all the experience in the world. He'd hide in the bushes a few yards ahead, and jump out in pathetic attempts at scaring us. Before long, we'd reached the furthest point we'd previously reached. 9th of April, 2012, it read. We kept walking, proud that we'd reached a new milestone. Shortly after, we noticed something in the darkness, contrasting starkly to the trees around it. Hey, what's that? Liam asked. I don't know, let's check it out. I basically yelled in response. As we got closer, we realized it was an old bunker. While it was a cool discovery, it wasn't that uncommon in our country. There were still thousands of concrete bunkers remaining after World War II. Still, we were excited to explore our new findings. Inside, it was rid of any equipment. All it contained was a hole in the middle, with a spiral staircase stretching deep into the ground. Let's climb down, Liam suggested. I don't know, Frank stuttered. It doesn't seem like a good idea. The stairs might break and trap us inside. You're just scared, admit it, Liam teased back. Not willing to admit our nervousness, Frank and I agreed to follow him down the stairs. The stairs themselves were made from metal. Though they felt solid enough, they produced loud, echoing sounds with each step down towards the bottom. After a minute without the end in sight, I started to get scared. How deep down does this go? I asked. In response, Liam took Frank's flashlight, and dropped it down the middle of the staircase. It fell, deep into the darkness. Holy crap, I can't even see it anymore. We need to go back. It's too far down, Frank said nervously. No way, we need to see where this leads. A short argument ensued. After some pushing, Frank gave in, and we kept going down. It took us more than 10 minutes just to descend the staircase. As we got further down, it progressively kept getting warmer and more humid. I could feel the sweat form on my face as we reached the bottom. Once down, we found a large room. It contained little more than a locked door, mold-covered floors, and the broken flashlight Liam had dropped down. "It's locked. I guess we have to go back," I weakly insisted. But Liam had already set out on a search to open the door. Before long, he found a metal panel on the wall. He pried it open, to reveal a lever. "I'm going to pull it," he said without consulting us. It produced a loud clunk, and the locked door slid open. Liam and I entered first, while Frank trailed behind us. Without a flashlight, he had no choice but to follow us closely. Inside, we found a narrow hallway filled with open prison cells. Each door to each cell was marked with a date. 7th of July 1954, 9th of August 1954, 13th of September 1954. The first few rooms didn't seem to contain anything other than dust. But, once we got to the end, we noticed something lying in the corner. There, on the floor, lay 3 completely emaciated people. They looked like skeletons covered in a thin layer of pale skin. According to the dates on the cells, they'd been there for more than 50 years. Yet, they hadn't rotted. Are they dead?" I asked. As I uttered those words, one of them twitched to life. We jumped at the sight, and prepared to run. Only then, did we realize that some of these creatures had been attached to the ceiling. They dropped down in front of us, and blocked the way. Their limbs were all deformed, too long to fur their small body. Still, they moved abnormally fast, almost twitching as they took their steps closer to us. Their eyes had been sewn shut, and they had far too many ribs. They weren't human. "Run!" Frank yelled. We tried to move towards the exit, ducking under their long arms, and spurting for the door. Frank and I made it easily enough, but Liam got stuck behind one of the creatures. "Don't leave me," he yelled, as he tried to maneuver past the sickly thin monster. With that, it reached out its thin arm, and pierced Liam's abdomen. Unable to speak, he simply fell limp where he stood, only held up by the creature that had killed him. Knowing we could do nothing to save him, Frank and I made a run for it. Our footsteps were dampened by the fungus and mold covering the floor. The things didn't even notice us until we reached the metal staircase. There, our steps rang loud through the metal, alerting the creatures to our location. Without looking behind us, we went up the stairs, only listening as they got closer. I was only a few steps ahead of Frank, but that was all it took for them to get him. I didn't even notice he was gone until I got halfway up the staircase. Then, a scream of agony echoed through the room. It was Frank, and thought I wasn't sure how far he'd gotten. I knew I couldn't help him. I just kept running, up the stairs, and into the woods. I didn't stop to breathe before I finally reached the comfort of the streetlights surrounding my neighborhood. Exhausted from the escape, I collapsed on my own doorstep, and passed out. Safe, but broken. Once I regained consciousness, I told my parents everything. At first, they didn't believe me. But, once the news of 2 missing children spread around our town, the police was alerted. Still, they couldn't confirm my story. They initiated a search and rescue operation. Though they found the bunker I mentioned, there were no traces of any malformed creatures, nor any proof that my 2 best friends died there. To this day, the case remains unsolved. However, since we opened the cages in the bunker, there have been a lot of reported cases of missing children. Unsolvable mysteries. Only I know the truth. I'm sorry, we never should have opened the bunker. I thought my daughter's imaginary friend was harmless. Now I need some advice. Kids. Snot-nosed, drooling, curious little monsters. I never understood why anyone had them. I was firmly anti-children for the majority of my life, and then one day I peed on a stick and my world changed forever. Such an innocuous action that had such a huge impact. I was blessed with an easy baby. The terrible twos never hit me either. Only recently have I really felt the stress and pressure of motherhood, and things have taken an unexpected turn. Eliza has been the sole reason for my existence for a wonderful, snot-filled 6 years now, and I wouldn't trade her for anything. Her dad didn't stick around. It's just been me and her against the world, and that's how I've liked it. Her little personality grows every day. She's a confident and sassy little girl. She gives the best hugs if you know her, but she understands stranger danger too. I've taught her well. That's why I wasn't worried when she first mentioned Susie. To be honest, I was excited that she'd gotten smart enough to craft her very own imaginary friend. Sure, there's a certain creep factor when your kid walks up to you, eyes wide, and announces that someone is already playing Dolly Tea Party with them in their room. But I tried to see the creative side. She was trying to establish some independence and I wasn't about to squash her spirit, so I played along. I asked her what she liked to play with Susie, how they became friends, and what Susie liked to eat. She gave all the typical answers: hide and seek, in the back garden, and cake. It was the cake that confirmed it. What kid wouldn't want an extra piece of cake that they could blame on a made-up person? Most adults wouldn't turn that down, so I joked about where Susie might be hiding. I set an extra plate out at dinner, gaining only an embarrassed eye roll, and I baked a cake and sent Eliza to school with 2 pieces. I enjoyed the little game. When she came home, there was still a piece left in her lunchbox, untouched. I know it probably sounds like I was reading too much into it, but that piece of cake shouldn't have been there. Not even a bite or a sticky finger mark in sight. Didn't Susie want her cake, honey? Susie doesn't go to school, mummy. That's silly. She's too big. That was the first time ever that something my daughter had said sent a chill down my spine. Too big. Like a giant or like someone that was too old for school. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something didn't feel right. I tried to pry for a while, but she shut me down in typical childlike fashion with a long-winded story about her dolls and why she needed the red-haired one next. I tried to write it off. The next time Susie came up in conversation, only 2 days later, wasn't so easy to ignore. What happened to your hair, Eliza? I asked, noting the complicated fish-tail braid that I'd never been dexterous enough to successfully create in my own hair, let alone her fine locks. Susie did it for me. Isn't it pretty, mummy? Taken aback, I grappled in my mind with the likelihood that my 6-year-old daughter had managed to stumble on a complicated do like that. All the YouTube videos in the world couldn't teach that to a kid her age. It just wasn't feasible. Heart pounding and fake smile plastered on my face, I skulked towards Eliza's bedroom, prepared to open a can of whoop ass on Susie. I don't know what I expected. Some sort of giant ghost child or a closet monster come to life, maybe. I know for sure I wasn't expecting the room to be empty, bar a pile of dolls on the floor. As I entered, I damn near had a heart attack. I felt stupid. It was a play. Just a stupid play and an imaginary friend. My kid was talented. I should have been celebrating. I'd spent hours on parenting sites and mums forums, and so many of them said that at some point their kid had said or done something creepy and scared the living fuck out of them. It was normal, right? I suppose all that time raising her on my own, I had no one to sound off with. I couldn't come up with an explanation, so I buried my discomfort, labeling it paranoia. I wish I hadn't. Things were quiet for a few days, and then around a week after the hair incident, Susie upped her game. Eliza woke me, screaming. I ran to her room to find her sobbing on the bed, clutching her battered, stuffed rabbit. Roger. What's wrong, honey? I sat on the bed and wrapped an arm around her, pulling her in close as I kissed her forehead and wiped her tears. She spoke with a broken voice, punctuated with tiny whimpers. Susie wouldn't let me sleep. She kept saying I had to go with her, but I'm tired and I'm going to Jessica's house tomorrow for dinner. Shoot. I'd forgotten about Jessica's. I was supposed to call her mother and warn her about Eliza's allergies. Is Susie here now? I can have a word with her for you if you want. I grinned at my daughter, ready to play the protective mother to an open space if needed. Susie ran away. She doesn't want you to see her. Why wouldn't she want me to see her? Because you might get angry. Why would I be angry? Eliza looked at me uncomfortably and itched at her arm over the top of her pajama sleeve. Gently I wiggled the fabric up to the elbow. She was trying to drag me with her, but I didn't want to go. Her bottom lip quivered. 3 claw marks. I don't know how else to describe them. They weren't cuts, they were gouges. How the fuck were there claw marks on my kid? They were deep, red and bloodied. I started to panic. I couldn't keep the calm facade for Eliza's sake despite trying. Soon there were a symphony of sirens headed towards my house. Police, ambulance. I begged for anyone who would respond. I must have sounded batshit crazy on the phone, babbling about a malevolent imaginary friend. We spent the night at the station after Eliza got thoroughly checked by a doctor, who was baffled by her wounds. They questioned me and her separately and put us up in a hotel for the night while they canvassed the area. They found nothing. I should have known that the lack of success would turn their attention to me. From an outsider's perspective, it really did look bad: injured kid and a paranoid mother. I'd have flagged me up too. They let us back home the next day, on the condition we checked in with a social worker every week. Eliza's play date with Jessica was cancelled, needless to say. Some time passed, 3 weeks, 3 visits from social services, 0 visits from Susie. I should have been elated, my problem had gone away and the social worker could see that I wasn't hurting my kid. Things were going well, right? Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Eliza had become withdrawn. She missed her friend but had become incredibly scared of her too. She didn't want to play with real friends and she barely slept, trying to keep her tired little eyes awake with all her might. I wondered if she was suffering from night terrors, but the doctor wasn't convinced that the symptoms matched. The claw marks just threw all logical explanations out the window. I saw the contempt in his eyes when he looked at me. I knew exactly what he thought. I encouraged her to draw. She wasn't her usual, creative self, but she managed multiple scrawlings of Susie, each drawn more furiously than the last. They just worried me even more. Eliza's image of the imaginary friend resembled an adult woman, with long dark hair and only 3 fingers on each hand, all clawed. The eyes were always scribbled out with intense pressure. I spent time on the phone to doctors, psychiatrists and counselors. I made appointments but none of them were acting quick enough. I couldn't afford to go private, even if I'd sold every belonging we had. So I was a slave to the waiting lists with an ever-shrinking child. I took action. I couldn't rely on the notion that Eliza was unwell. Regardless of logical thought, those claw marks had been real and I couldn't risk her getting hurt again. I hadn't felt safe at home since that night. So I set up cameras all over the house. It raised an eyebrow when I mentioned it to the social worker, but I didn't care. If there was a Susie, I wanted to catch her. I sat and reviewed the footage every day. I would speed it up and even the hint of a breeze would have me scrutinizing a section of recording for hours. I didn't let Eliza see what I was doing. I didn't want to frighten the poor girl anymore. For weeks, nothing happened. Then last night I woke to another scream. Eliza couldn't stop. She screamed for so long I thought her lungs were going to give out. I ran as fast as I could and the room was empty. Just my catatonic daughter screaming in distress. Where is she? She ran away. Eliza sobbed, raising an arm. I ran to the window frantically, Eliza pointing in that direction, but there wasn't anyone outside. I started to wonder if maybe I was believing her too strongly. What if me playing along had just made her ill? There were no marks this time, no evidence of anyone. I tucked her in and slept on the floor beside her. I don't think either of us slept a wink. I reviewed the footage this morning. Eliza was adorable. Hair in a mess across the pillow, sleeping soundly. She needed it so desperately. It made me emotional, watching my baby like that. All the worries melted away. Until her sash window slid open. She jolted awake as what looked like 3 dirty fingernails wrapped around from the bottom of the window frame and scraped against the glass. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I can't describe how it felt, watching her, knowing that I even considered that she was making it up. Eliza screamed just seconds before Susie would have reached her, just before those dirty nails would have pierced her skin. The entity even took the time to look at the camera, with her hollowed-out sockets. Susie was taunting me. I called the police. Handed the footage over. They looked shocked, like they didn't know what to say. I'd given them a scene out of a horror movie and begged for their help. It must have been an interesting day at the office for them. They searched my house and the area around it and put us up in the same hotel as before, this time with a police car parked outside. That's where me and Eliza are spending the night. I wish they'd done more, but realistically, what can they? Where are they even supposed to start? My kid's traumatized and I can't tell her it's going to be okay. I don't have a clue who or what Susie is or what she wants. I just know that right now, we're locked in a bathroom avoiding it. Me, Eliza and Roger the stuffed rabbit. When she came an hour ago, Eliza's screams didn't work like before. Susie's nails are still scraping against the locked hotel window. It's a bone-chilling sound. Every time I dial the police I get a busy tone. Eliza's been screaming for so long now. Why has no one come to help us?